Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. My name is Melissa Flood. I work for Marriott. I look after our public policy and social impact team. And it's through the public policy lens that I am here to talk about digital borders and our partnership with Accenture and the World Economic Forum. I manage the relationship with the forum for the company. For those of you that don't know, the World Economic Forum is essentially a convening organization of thought leaders, of CEOs, of NGO leadership, and of governments. And so when we were starting to talk about the future of travel, the World Economic Forum was really the right place to get a lot of the pieces of the puzzle in the room at the same time to be able to have those meaningful conversations. So back in 2012, for the first time, we hit a global milestone. 1 billion international trips were taken for the first time in history. And a couple years later, it was projected by the UN World Tourism Organization that we were going to hit nearly 2 billion trips by 2030. And we started thinking at Marriott, how is that going to work? We are essentially adding about 100 million new travelers to that list of billion since 2012, tracking up to 1.8 billion by 2030. And yet technology has happened all around us. Innovation has happened all around us in the last several years. And yet the process by which people travel is still pretty cumbersome. It has not changed much in the last 50 to 60 years. And so we were asking the question at Marriott, how can we be part of the solution to actually realize these 2 billion trips by 2030? Because if we simply layer on another billion people to our existing policy framework, we're never going to get there. And what that means is we're never going to realize the economic benefit of those 2 billion international trips. I don't probably need to tell you all this. International visitors spend a whole lot more and they stay a lot longer than domestic travelers, right? So an average US traveler will spend about $1,000 on their trip. An international visitor to the United States will spend anywhere between $4,000 and $7,000 on their trip. That's really meaningful in terms of an economic prospect of facilitating these 2 billion international trips. So there's an incentive for the industry and for a private company to figure out, does the system today work? How can we use some of the technology that's modernizing the world in so many other places and bring it in to the travel ecosystem so that we can actually get to those 2 billion international trips by 2030? So we started to work with a forum to talk about smoother travel, frictionless travel, making the process easier, simpler. And then Paris happened in November of 2015, and a series of very significant attacks ever since, which has had the effect, not surprisingly, of governments bringing up barriers to travel, not bringing them down. And so we realized that we needed to be talking less about facilitation and more about security and how we can do both, facilitate secure travel and legitimate travel, and make the process smoother for the folks that we know the most about, and make the process more difficult and be able to find those needles in the haystack in a more effective way. And so we have been going through that process over the last couple years in partnership with the World Economic Forum to really map the journey and to take a look and say, okay, what are the sticking points in this holistic process, and how can we find ways to make the travel process both smoother but also more secure? There is no travel without security, right? So at no point have we ever thought, should we make this process less secure, right? And a big piece of this, of course, is governments. And governments are the ones that are often controlling the spigot, right? They're controlling who gets a visa. They're controlling who gets issued a passport. At immigration, they decide who gets to come in this travel journey. And so governments needed to buy into this, and anything that was less stringent as it relates to security or would undermine their ability to ensure that they were meeting their own policy frameworks and requirements and laws as it related to security would not be an effective solution. So we took a look at all of the sticking points and through the WEF process with us and others. And we realized that the piece of this that where we were really focused, we had been focused on working with government, but there was a piece that was missing, and that was the focus on the traveler. They are central at each of these points. They are experiencing each of these points. And so how can we make the traveler be a more central actor in the security process? At WEF, we had an opportunity a couple years in a row to produce various white papers, essentially academic exercises, talking about what this could look like. And finally, at their annual meeting that just happened last week in Davos, Switzerland, last year, in 2017 in January, our CEO, Arne Sorensen, came back to me and said, "This white paper is great. No more white papers. No more white papers, Melissa. We've got to figure out how we take this awesome idea of innovating the future of travel and making the travel process both smoother and more secure. And we have to bring it to action. We've got a lot of ideas. We've got a lot of concepts. How can we make it happen?" And that's where the partnership with Accenture has been so incredibly fruitful. We all had day jobs. All the company reps that work with the WEF, we all have other jobs that we do during the day. And so nobody really had the ability to figure out, okay, what is this thing? What do we want to build? How do we want to make it work? Nor do we have the technology background to be able to make it work. So Accenture has been an incredible partner in figuring out, okay, what does this mean if we're going to put a traveler at the center of this journey and as a key player, what does it look like? And the concept, the known traveler digital identity, was born. And essentially what it does is it allows a traveler to create a digital profile embedded with all sorts of information, including biometric information. And then they're then in control of that profile. They can decide who do they push it to. They can push it to the private sector in their booking process. They can push it to government authorities as they're seeking a visa. They can push it to security authorities as they're going through the airport. They can push it to a foreign government as they're going through the immigration process, et cetera. And the traveler becomes the central part of creating that smoother process. And so from our perspective here, this known traveler digital identity concept, it only works though if it's really a three-legged stool. The traveler obviously has to buy into it. They've got to create this profile. They also need to see that there is meaningful benefit to submitting their data, right? They have to know that their data is secure and that it's actually going to deliver them a smoother process. For governments, for a government to want a partner to be able to say, okay, I'm going to accept this data, this information that's coming from this traveler, they've got to have confidence that the information that they're getting is, of course, accurate. But also the benefit to government then is they get that information sooner in the process. They can vet that individual, clear that individual. It gives them the ability to focus more on the folks they know less about. So it's a great resource management tool. If they can say, have 50% of their people pre-vetted and they know they're safe, they're then able to focus much more of their resources on finding those needles in the haystack. And then lastly, for the private sector, I mean, think about, if someone's pushing information, how many times does a traveler enter the same information in their booking process, right, or in their travel journey? They're entering it when they're making their hotel reservation, their flights, probably when they're filling out their forms if they need to get a visa, et cetera. And so the private sector, there's a real opportunity for us to take this technology and figure out how can we make the travel experience better and more effective for our customers and really deliver better customer service. And so those are sort of the three premises that we really set out to achieve as we were coming up with this concept of the known traveler digital identity, which has, thanks to Accenture's great leadership and the partnership with the World Economic Forum, it was rolled out as a pilot last week in Davos, Switzerland, and I will say to really good fanfare. And so with that, I'm gonna have these guys play a video that'll give you a sense of the KTDI technology and what it means, and then have Rajiv from Accenture come up, who will talk a little bit more about that technology interface. You can go ahead and play the video.
In 2016, the travel industry recorded 1.2 billion international arrivals across the globe. By 2030, that number will skyrocket to a staggering 1.8 billion, a reality that's simply unsustainable with our current travel system. Introducing the Known Traveler Digital Identity, the first end-to-end intervention to streamline the entire travel experience by enhancing the ability of authorities to get the information they need when they need it so that they can move people swiftly across borders. Enabled through 4 technologies, not only will individuals have complete control over their own personal data, but authorities can remove friction through a series of simple and secure digital touchpoints. Here's how it works. First, travelers build their known traveler profile, scanning their passports to input biographical data, capturing their unique facial and fingerprint biometrics, and building in additional traveler information like driver's license numbers and credit card details. During airline bookings, travelers can seamlessly use their known traveler digital ID to autofill their reservations and even pay for their bookings. They can also share specific parts of their digital identity with country authorities to apply for travel authorizations such as visas or for advanced immigration and security pre-clearance, all before they've even packed their bags. Once a government authority approves a visa application or allows a border crossing, they will add an entry to a secure blockchain and provide the traveller with a digital stamp in their digital identity wallet. Whether travellers need a visa or not, sharing their known traveller profile with authorities in advance means on the day of departure, travellers can speed past the traditional immigration controls. At the airport, travellers can leverage their biometric verification across all touchpoints, from the baggage counter to the departure gate. And thanks to pre-screening, government authorities can utilise temporarily stored biometric and biographic information to quickly guide travellers to the appropriate lanes based on their pre-assigned risk level and the digital stamps in the traveller's identity wallet. In the traveller's personal data store, verified digital stamps prove to customs and border officials that other national authorities have verified the identity of the traveller. Using this trusted information, officials can effectively and efficiently assess passengers' entry details, ultimately creating shorter lines, reducing costs, and carving out more time to identify and mitigate any real risks. The known traveller digital identity also links with private companies, providing opportunities to facilitate entire itineraries, from catching an airport shuttle to unlocking a hotel room with a fingerprint. Through an advanced multi-device mobile interface, unparalleled biometrics, and an impenetrable blockchain, the system also learns with time. The more approved digital verification stamps a traveller acquires, the more credibility that individual will have on their next journey. Endless lines and excessive documents belong in the past.
All right, so I'm Rajiv Kaul. I'm a managing director from Accenture Technology, and I led up the effort for building the prototype over the past year with Marriott, WEF, and a number of other, about 20 or so public and private organizations focusing on travel to solve this problem. So I'm going to spend a few minutes kind of double-clicking into sort of how this works, to give you a better sense. Unfortunately, when we were in Davos last week, we actually had a full working demo of our prototype that we showcased. Unfortunately, all of our toys and biometrics devices are on their way back from the 6 feet of snow we were dealing with out there. But I'll do my best to try to talk through it. So there's 3 key areas, as you saw in the video. The identity really is centered around you owning your identity, right? We're trying to get out of a sort of decentralized model, and you owning your identity, and you choose to share it. With regulations, GDPR and things that are coming, this is sort of the model that we're going to start to shift. I think everything is going to be shifting towards this model. The other key area here is on blockchain. So if we're going to be in a decentralized model, how do we start to establish trust between all of the different government, public and private entities? So the approach we've taken is to use a distributed ledger, is to use blockchain. And the interesting thing here is the blockchain does not actually contain some of the profile information. Okay, so when I'm enrolling through my passport. I'll walk you through that in just a minute. So we enroll through the passport, we take some biometrics, but that is actually decentralized off the chain. And what this allows you to do is it allows you to, with GDPR, like I mentioned, and other regulations, it actually allows the entities, so the US government, for example, Canada, actually controls their data. And this blockchain, this sense of trust, has references and has pointers to that, to those actual sources of data that are there. And then finally, biometrics. It's been proven by NIST and other organizations that actually, facial recognition, fingerprints, biometrics is a much more secure way of validating people's identity than just looking at them, right? Or comparing them to a passport or to a card. The science is definitely there. Different sets of biometrics technology have sort of different results from performance and accuracy, but biometrics is clearly the way to authorize folks. So I'm going to walk through a little bit more about how this works. So what we have is we have an enrollment process that you saw on the video. And I have a few screens here we can show as well. So during the enrollment process, what you're doing is you're scanning your passport. You are effectively creating your profile. Depending on the mobile device that you're using at this time, we'll get rid of the phone sometime in the future. Today we can't really do that yet. But you enroll in the prototype we've built. You take a selfie, and that's actually your facial scan. The quality of the picture is more than good enough to do that. Now, the problem is that I need an actual trusted entity to verify, to validate that I am who I say I am, right? So today's process includes us going to an enrollment center, sort of like you would do for like a global entry here in the US. And an agent there will actually verify you. They will actually look at your passport. They will do additional biometric scans. In this case, we had a fingerprint scanner. And so now you own your identity with with your profile information, your passport information, and associated biometrics. And that's your first entry into the system. And it's validated. It's been validated by, for example, US government. And now we have our first entry onto the blockchain from a trusted source there. Okay? But the enrollment is key, and it being from a trusted source is also very important. So this is some of our screens on what the enrollment agent would look like, and trying to streamline that process as well. Now, if we fast forward to a trip, okay, I book a trip. I'm flying from Amsterdam to Toronto, and I'm staying at the Marriott at the Marriott Airport, Toronto. Excuse me. What would happen today is, as we've demonstrated, is that here on the left you see the list of passengers that are arriving, the manifest of the travelers, and each one of them, some of them have submitted to share their identity, some of them have not submitted to share their identity through the system. And the agent will actually look and see, okay, what are the sets of stamps that they have? Are they coming, the different, is a visa needed from this country that they are coming? Where have they been? What are other records? Maybe I want to look at their immunization records. Different types of information, and we can decide manually, the agent can decide manually at that point, do I trust them, right? Or should they be entered and cleared, pre-cleared, and can enter our lane where we do the expedited screening through biometrics. Or we could decide not to, and they'll need to go through the traditional areas. Now, if this person is flying from Canada, you notice that they don't have to also register in Canada. They're relying on the enrollment that was done in the US and all of the other information that's on the blockchain that's been verified, and makes the decision on whether or not to let them in through the expedited process. Now, over time, what's exciting about this, we heard about AI earlier, is that we introduced some of those capabilities here, and now rather than a manual process from all this data, that can start to become more intelligent, and that can start to become automated. And even this process, we do a better job of screening, and we do a faster job of screening as well. And then the key here really is what you see as these travel stamps. Every time I cross a border, every time I check into a hotel, anything that's participating in this system, right? We have a stamp that's added, just sort of like your passport stamp. These are more like digital stamps. But it allows us over time, and allows an individual over time to sort of have this identity that's associated with them. And as we start to enter hospitals, we talked about earlier, the mayor talked about the badges, right, for people that were pre-screened. This is a perfect example of that, where you use your known travel or digital identity. It's been already verified by the governments or other sovereign entities, trusted entities here. So are they participating in this? This is where we can really start to expand the use of the KTDI. And the beauty is, there's about 12 trusted traveler programs in the world. You're saying, hey, why is this different than Global Entry? It's the same thing. I just put my finger in there. A couple key things here is, one is that you're not registering in every country. It takes an organization like the World Economic Forum to bring the public and private sectors together. And the whole notion of owning my identity versus somebody else owning my identity. So this was announced last week. Actually, before we do that, I want to talk about a couple quick biometrics vendors that we've been working with here. NEC came also to Davos. We did facial recognition to enter the session for everybody that came in there. This is actually 99.2% accuracy without stopping or acknowledging the camera. We had this also out in Davos. This is a touchless fingerprint scan. It's very cool. You literally just wave your hand through it, and it validates you immediately. And so this simulated our border crossing and checking into the hotel while we were out there. This is actually going up in Dubai airport for security scan, where you're kind of removing the security experience, the security experience from the actual checkpoint. So here, this is a tunnel that you walk through that is checking your facial recognition as you go. And finally, just a couple of things from Davos, right? Marriott announced they're going to be piloting this along with Canada and the Netherlands around their commitments to pilot this over the next year. And lots of coverage over the past week, so a lot more information here from these. Just Google known travel with digital identity. You'll get about 5 pages worth of articles there. And so that's it.